Welcome, everyone, to the Center for Healthy Sex guest webinar series with our special guest today, Neil Cannon, who will be presenting Mismatched Libidos, helping couples close the gap in sexual desire. Before we start with Neil, I'll just make a couple of quick announcements. Our next webinar will be held at the same time on November 13 with Erica Marchand, presenting on common issues in interracial relationships. She's an excellent presenter, so check us out for that. And you can enjoy all of our webinar and lecture recordings by going to YouTube and entering Center for Healthy Sex as your search term. Center for Healthy Sex is a outpatient psychotherapy center founded by myself and Alex Katehakis here in West Los Angeles, where we offer sex therapy services for men, women, and couples in individual, group, and intensive formats. I also want to just mention our special book, Mirror of Intimacy. It's a book of daily meditations written by Tom Bliss and Alex Katehakis, 365 days worth of special writings on healthy sexuality and erotic intelligence. So you can check that out on Amazon. It's available in paperback and hardback. So I want to introduce to you your presenter today, Neil Cannon. He is an ASEX certified sex therapist, licensed marriage family therapist practicing in Denver, Colorado. He earned his doctorate degree in human sexuality in San Francisco and has a master's degree in public health and postgraduate certification in marriage family therapy, as well as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender family systems. Neil's in private practice in Denver, and about 75% of his of his clients are couples, and he treats anything that has to do with sex, intimacy, and relationships. So you've got a really top national expert here to provide you with some interesting perspective on the topic today. He's a published author, a professional speaker, supervisor, mentor, and nationally recognized expert. And again, his topic today is mismatched libidos, helping couples close the gap in desire. So thank you, Neil, for being with us, and hope you all enjoy the presentation.
Thanks for having me, Douglas. I really appreciate it. And it's great to see so many people I know on here. And I just saw Tony sign on in New York City, so that's fabulous too. It's just great for me to be here broadcasting from Denver today for a whole bunch of reasons. One, it's a beautiful fall day. Hope it is where all of you are. And two, we just got named the sexiest city in America. How cool is that? And Ann Arbor, where I teach at the University of Michigan in the School of Social Work Certificate for Sexual Health program, was ranked number 3. So I'm feeling pretty good about life right now, 1 and 3. Now, I got some bad news, and I saw Carol from Florida, and I recognize that Miami is a long way from Jacksonville. But if you're in Jacksonville, I got bad news because Jacksonville got rated dead last as the least lustful city in America. So if you're in Jacksonville, we are here to kind of help prop you up today and turn on the sexy. So that's the scoop here to get rolling. I'll tell you the reason I picked this topic to talk about today is because in some ways it's just so relevant, and in some ways it's the most common concern I think that I get as a sex therapist, and I've heard many sex therapists say the same thing, is that mismatched libido is like the number one presenting concern that couples come in for sex therapy. The operative word here to me is really important, because you notice I didn't talk about low desire, high desire, although I will touch on it later, but it's really about the gap. And there are mismatches sometimes. So for those who are listening that are in this situation, it's really, to me, it's just about how do we take this gap and we close this gap. It's not necessarily about anything different than that, and we just have to get creative on how we do it, and there's a lot of ways to get there. One of the things that I think is really important when we do this work, and I know there's clinicians on here and there's also consumers on here, so it's kind of like we'll kind of go back and forth between different kinds of messages, but to me, one of the big things is that if you're a consumer and you want to get under the skin of your sex therapist, just send your spouse to sex therapy to get fixed. And that'll, it tweaks us before we ever even get started. And we have to then start managing our countertransference around this kind of thing. Because we don't fix the low desire partner. And that's kind of what happens culturally sometimes is, a spouse will say, just, go fix my partner. And that's just not what we do. We'll talk about what we do instead here in a few minutes. So I'm going to just click forward. I'm so used to university settings where I have to have disclosures. So I'm going to click forward to the slide that says erotic templates. I guess I drive these slides. Is that right? We're going to try. There we go. Hey, how about that? Okay. The technology works. Pretty cool. So let's just start with the concept of erotic templates. So Jack Morin introduced that verbiage many years ago in his book called Erotic Minds. And I think it's a great way to think about things. But I'll tell you like my take on how I think about erotic templates. I think about erotic templates like fingerprints. There's no two that are exactly alike, and there's not one that's better than another. They're just different. So your fingerprints aren't any better than yours or mine or anybody else, and the same thing applies to erotic templates. So let's figure out, well, what are the kind of things that might get included when we think about erotic templates? So erotic templates could be partly maybe the way we like to kiss or neck or make out. It's different for everybody. How many times have we all heard somebody say that person's a really good kisser or a really bad kisser, right? So there's a judgment around it. But the truth is, maybe their erotic template is just different from ours in the way they kiss. Doesn't make it better or worse. It's different. Kink is another example of erotic templates. And by kink, I kind of use that as the umbrella term for things like BDSM. And then some of you are saying, well, what's BDSM? So BDSM is bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism, kind of 50 Shades of Grey kind of stuff. Fetishes can be part of erotic templates sometimes. The type of touch we like, soft touch, light touch, firm touch, where we like to be touched, right? All this stuff adds up to our own individual erotic templates. Oral sex, manual sex, and time of day, is also part of our erotic template. Some people like sex in the morning, some people like sex in the evenings. Everybody's different. Not one way is better than another. And then, this big piece that we're going to talk about today is the frequency piece, right? That's part of our erotic template. Is how much desire do we have? How high or low is our libido? How much are we wanting sex, either partnered sex or masturbation or whatever it is? Where does it lie for us in terms of frequency? And how do all these things play together to make up our erotic template? And then if you're sitting there right now, home alone or at your office, and you're thinking, all right, so what causes erotic templates? Well, the answer is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because there's so many variables that make up our erotic templates, right? There's biology and there's psychology, there's nature, there's nurture, there's all that stuff. So we don't really know. And I think when people and therapists, clinicians kind of jump to these broad conclusions, well, a certain person's this way because of that, sometimes there's a little psychobabble that kind of gets mixed in with the actual hypotheses and clinical assessments. So I'm pretty careful on that piece. We just don't know a lot of the whys, which is then really important when we work with couples, for me, to think about, well, how do we integrate whatever it is into our relationship? How do we help couples get more of what they want rather than focus on why is somebody a certain way? It's more about the what to me. So that's kind of my thoughts on erotic templates. And so the way I always think about when I've got a couple and they come in and they've got a gap in desire, I always think about it. Let me just lower my screen just a tad. There you go. There's my hands. So I always think about it as these three circles, right? So I guess if you're listening on the radio and you can't see the slides, or listening on your phone, because nobody has a radio anymore, we just have phones. There's kind of imagine like a bullseye. So in the middle, we've got the smallest circle, and that's genitals, and then the next circle out is the whole self, and then the broadest circle is relationship. So I kind of start like trying to construct in my mind these three parts of a person's life as we think about closing the gap. And so I've got 2 people at least, and my clients sometimes have more than 2, but we'll just keep it simple and say we've got 2 people. Well, let's just make it really simple. Say we've got a heterosexual couple, although these principles apply to gay couples and lesbian couples. Let's just kind of think about our setup. So the first part for me is just think about the genitals. So, and I don't do this in any particular order, but this is what's kind of the construct in my head or on my notes. So if it's the genitals, there's like 2 parts for me that I want to make sure we understand really well, because these are the 2 biggest things that get in the way of people having the kind of sex they want. The first part is on the women's side of things is pain. And that, when there's pain for women around sex, genital touch, intercourse, it's really, really problematic. It's hard to look forward. It's hard to have desire for something when you know it's going to hurt. So we're going to talk more about that piece in a little bit. So that'll be the first part. And when I think about the male side of things, I'm going to think about functioning, right? How well does the penis work? Because if men are concerned, they might have a sexual functioning issue, and we'll talk more details in a few minutes. But just broadly, if men are concerned about sexual functioning, they are going to retreat. We do not want the embarrassment or the pain or the shame of not having our manly penises work. That's very disturbing for many men. So that's how I kind of think about the genital piece in a nutshell, if you will. No pun intended. And then the next circle out is I'm thinking about the whole self. And here we're thinking about things like body image. How does a person actually feel about their body? Are they comfortable being naked? Are they comfortable being touched? Everything related to body image, that piece is really important. Is there any kind of unhealed trauma or abuse? Because if that's the case, that can have all kinds of implications on sex, intimacy, relationships, sense of self. So I think if you're one of the consumers, client, person listening in for your own benefit, these are the kinds of things where, first off, my heart goes out to you. And then secondly, this is where professional help is just so important. And I'll give you resources before we're all done as how to go about getting professional help if you need it. And then mental health issues. Mental health issues are a big deal when it comes to sex and intimacy, whether it's ADHD. You kind of think about a guy with ADHD and, it's kind of hard to focus on pleasure, when you're watching the spider crawl across the ceiling. So there's lots of different implications for different kinds of mental health issues. So I always want to make sure that that's really solid and shored up. And then I want to think about childhood messages, unresolved religious issues, messages from parents or important adults in somebody's life, or other kids for that matter. And it's a real interesting one, because when it comes to religious messages, you're talking to a 35-year-old person and they got really powerful religious messages when they were kiddos, and they'll often say, well, yeah, I was raised it's really strict in this particular religion, but it doesn't affect me anymore. And that's like a knee-jerk reaction for lots of people. But when you actually start drilling down and really get to know them and understand their situation and the way they view the world, a lot of times there are these messages that carry forward around shame and guilt and sex. And so trying to unpack that and really help people understand themselves in that way so that they can heal from, kind of, it's like religious trauma sometimes, is really important. Just like the concept, sometimes I'll look at a client and I'll just tell me so who's at the foot of your bed? And, some people just right away know, well, ever since my grandmother died, I have always had this image of her looking down at me when I'm having sex or when I'm masturbating or when it's whatever, or when I'm doing this particular thing. and it really freaks me out. So who's at the foot of your bed is kind of an interesting question. Some clients will look at it as like we're kind of wacky. That's okay, because some clients will really jump on it and be like, oh yeah, wait a minute, I get it. When I'm thinking about the whole self, still in that second circle, we're thinking about hormone balances. It's always important to have a good endocrinologist or a good MD, good gynecologist that can help us make sure that part of the puzzle is the way we need it to be. And then substances and alcohol is an issue for a lot of people when there's a gap in libido. And so we need to be kind of thinking about, that piece of the pie as well, as can be prescription medicines. There's a few things that'll kill libido as quickly and as effectively as certain prescriptions. So, I know there's lots of clinicians on this call, and I'm sure that just like me, most all have an intake form that has clients list out all the medicines they're on, because there are some that are just devilish. And, things like certain supplements can be problematic. And like, for instance, Propecia, there's a lot of evidence on, Propecia helps people grow hair. It looks like maybe I should have used it. But the good news is my penis still works. So, and that's part of the problem. There's lots of, I think, there's studies and discussions and worries that Propecia can cause permanent issues. So with erections. And so there's just trying to understand all the different things that people put in their bodies is really, really important. And then kind of this bigger circle, so we've gone to genitals, we've gone to whole self, and we go to the big circle on the outside is the relationship. So to me, if people are in long-term marriages or relationships, if there's not connection, really solid connection, it's really hard to have good sex on a consistent basis. I mean, they can't pull it off once in a while, drunk New Year's Eve party kind of thing. But if they want to have a good, solid, happy, healthy couple sex life kind of thing, there's got to be connection. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And I'll kind of show you how to be thinking about, or at least how I think about it, and another way to work on that piece. One of the things I always think about when it comes to connection, because it's one of the simplest, easiest constructs, is Dr. John Gottman's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So Dr. Gottman studied thousands of couples in his love lab, his apartment lab up at the University of Washington over decades. And, what he found is that there's these patterns that are the leading causes and leading predictors of divorce. And what I found in my work with couples, and as Douglas said, 75% of my work is with couples. If the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse are in play, it's a absolute relationship killer that shows up sexually. So I really pay attention to this. So what are the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse? So there are 4 patterns. The first one is that one partner is critical, and the second one is that one partner is defensive. The third horseman is that one partner or both is contemptuous, which means they kind of look down at their partner. And then the last one is called stonewalling. It's basically withdrawing and it's getting flooded. Just want to get away. So if you can kind of imagine, if you just start thinking about it in that construct, well, if I feel criticized by my partner, how sexy is that? How attractive is that? How much am I going to want to have sex with somebody who's criticizing me? Whether it's about sex or unrelated to sex, direct or indirect, it's hugely problematic. And then take the same concept around contempt, right? Because that, of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, that's actually the leading predictor of divorce. And if you think about it, could there be anything less sexy than wanting to have sex with a person who looks down at you? That'd be a horrible feeling. So, really it closes people off because they want to protect themselves. So I really think about that in every assessment when I'm thinking about the relationship piece. And so then part and parcel to that, or possibly other things, are unhealed resentments. So if there's unhealed resentments, they've got to get healed before couples are able to move forward. And I think that's just a darn good rule of thumb. So I'm kind of always sniffing around for that piece. And if I've got a couple that's really shut off from sex and maybe hasn't had sex in a long time, which happens sometimes, I've got couples, right, that haven't had sex in 1 year, 2 years, 15 years. One of my favorite interventions for that kind of thing, because it really starts to flush things out, is to just have them finish this sentence, which is, I'll be ready for sex when. So, and then, you know, all kinds of things come out of that. I'll be ready for sex when he's nice to me. I'll be ready for sex when he gets down off his pedestal. I'll be ready for sex when I'm treated like an equal. I'll be ready for sex when, you know, I've healed from this affair that he or she had 8 years ago, right? Those kinds of things. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about there. Let's see here. We're going to click forward to the next slide. And I put that slide in really for the non-clinicians. Clinicians, you might find it useful too, but for the non-clinicians, I just thought this would be a nice little exercise that you could do with your spouse, is if you just took this slide and you think about these 6 things being doubts, fear, worries, frustration, anger, and stress, because each one of those things impacts our ability to be present. Each one of those things makes it difficult to experience pleasure. Each one of those things just makes us not really want to actually take the time to be in bed. We've got another whole bunch of other things that are weighing us down. So you kind of check in with yourself and check in with your partner. Where are we on this? And what do we need to do to shore these things up so that we don't feel this way? And I'm clicking forward to the next slide. So I wanted to just drill down just a little bit into some of the female sexual difficulties, and then we'll do the same thing with some of the male sexual difficulties, because I think when we think about gaps in libido, these are like the big ones. We get our arms around these, then we are able to help people solve an awful lot of problems. So we know that, you know, low sexual desire and arousal disorder, you know, this is right out of the DSM language kind of thing, diagnostic and statistical manual. The 2 big things, I think, for women when it comes to sexual difficulties around this piece is when women are not having orgasms. And for some women, that's completely fine and they enjoy sex. And I think this is like a cultural misnomer that women can't have fun in bed without having orgasms. And I mean, it's really kind of interesting, because I probably heard, oh my gosh, you know, I don't know, 3 times this week, a female client telling her male partner, look, it's okay. I want to have sex and I don't need to have an orgasm every time. But the key here is every time. So yes, it's okay. It's all okay. It makes you happy. It's all okay. But my point is that we have to believe the woman in our life. And if she says, I want to have sex and I don't need to have an orgasm, then we want to believe that. Now, that said, for some women who are not having orgasms, or either never or rarely, then if we can help them have orgasms, it's a game changer. So I always have my female clients that have never had an orgasm. I like to have them have a date with themselves. And I've had women that have cried just when I've given them the idea and the concept and permission to have a date with themselves, because just having 2 hours of alone time with snotty-nosed little kids running around and pulling at their body. I mean, oh my gosh, how many times have we heard women with children, you know, 2 or 3 children under 5 say, I just don't want to be touched, oh my gosh, by anybody. I've always got somebody touching me. So I like to have my female clients have a date with themselves and learn their own body first, because if they can learn their own body, then they can teach this to their partner, a lot of times with our help as sex therapists. But it's just a really good starting place. So I like to have women get a small vibrator like a Lilo, not a great big Hitachi, nothing wrong with big Hitachi, but it's not a starter vibrator. I want something, nice and friendly and a pretty color and all that kind of good stuff. And I really invite my clients in everything, but especially on this piece, to focus on pleasure, not performance. So it's not about locking yourself up in your room with your vibrator and an erotic novel, all good, just for the purpose of having an orgasm. It's starts just to get to be able to know your body and know how you feel and get in touch with things. I love erotic novels for women to help them learn how to have orgasms if they're not orgasmic. Erotic novels, romance novels, Nancy Friday fantasy journals, and it's just a nice way to start letting women start to get in touch if they don't know how to do that. And there's a lot of women that do not know how to do that. There are a lot of women that come in our office that have never had an orgasm, or it's been 10 years and they've kind of gotten out of touch and forgot how. So that's the first piece. The other piece, and by the way, there's a couple good resources too, like, there's a really good video that I like that I use that's called Becoming Orgasmic, and it's made by the Sinclair Institute. And although it's a little older, it's okay. The body's the same, still pretty much all the same parts, just a little bit of an older video. So you kind of got to get past that piece. And then there's the other piece that happens for women is this whole pain piece. So when there's pelvic pain, vaginal pain, vulvar pain of any type, it's just debilitating. And then what happens is there becomes an anticipatory dread. So long before a woman is ever going to have sex, she starts worrying about what the pain might be like, and her body remembers. And so when there's pain around intercourse, I ask all my clients to stop having intercourse until we get a physical exam from a gynecologist that specializes in women's sexual health that can give us a good diagnosis and a treatment plan. Because first off, if women continue to have intercourse when there's pain, first off, it just reinforces to the body that the memory of, okay, intercourse means pain. And that has all kinds of implications that we don't want. And then secondly, sometimes they can do more damage. Like for instance, with micro tears, if there's micro tears and you continue to have intercourse, that can just make it worse. And then it becomes even really problematic. So I like to just shut it down until we get a clearance from a medical doctor. My model is I always go to, I think what makes, and I always tell my supervisees this, I think part of what makes a really good sex therapist is to have a really good team. So I really want to make sure I've got, 2 or 3 or 4, and I'm fortunate because I'm in a big enough market. It is the sexiest city in America, where I have, several good gynecologists that I can refer to that do have lots of passion and expertise in women's sexual health. And so that's an important part of the healing process. So then if you're sitting there right now and you're sitting in your living room with your, we've got a heterosexual couple sitting in your living room in Oklahoma right now, and you're saying, wow, dude, this doctor just said I'm not supposed to have intercourse. That sounds horrible until we get this fixed. Well, long term, it's going to help. But secondly, that doesn't mean we can't have sex, right? So I have a much bigger definition of sex than the average person sitting at home. Because to me, sex is all these things. Holding hands can be sex. Rubbing necks can be sex. If you've ever seen, either on film or in person, disabled people, like a quadriplegic, for instance, have sex, they can have orgasms by having their ears touched. So sometimes when there's a penis in the vagina, we get really stuck on that only kind of sex is intercourse. And that's just fueled by our culture, which isn't very helpful sometimes. So I like to think of sex as all these things. And so we're going to introduce the term outer course, which I think was originally, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think it was originally coined by Barry McCarthy, Dr. Barry McCarthy, who's brilliant, actually just published a new book. But outer course is everything else. It's everything but intercourse. You know, it's kissing, it's necking, it's making out, it's manual sex, it's oral sex, it's all kinds of stuff. It's masturbation. It's anything you want it to be, as long as you're not doing things to cause pain. Pain, bad. So that's there's my nickel's worth on kind of some of the female sexual difficulties, at least as headlines.
Hi, Neil. We have a question from Kirby in Austin. He was wondering about your previous slide with the 6 impediments to pleasure. He was wondering what you mean by doubts.
Oh, so doubts could be, doubts that, I doubt that I can have an erection. I doubt that I can ejaculate. I doubt that I can have intercourse without having pain again, because last time we had sex was 2 years ago and I had pain. So now I have doubts that we can currently have sex without pain as well. That kind of thing.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Which is the perfect segue into the concept of, look, at the end of the day, there's only 2 kinds of pain. And I learned this from Dr. John Slocum, who's a brilliant gynecologist and has helped more women in Colorado and more upcoming gynecologists than probably anybody in this state. There's only 2 kinds of pain. There's explained pain and there's unexplained pain. And my message to women, if you're experiencing pain and it's not explained, all that means is we don't know what's causing it yet, and you're not crazy. And I think that that's one of the things that happens. And I think women with pain, it's so easy to get minimized and marginalized and ignored and made to think like you're broken and that you're just not trying hard enough. So I really want you to just hear loud and clear. It's when we have unexplained pain, it's real pain. There's no mistake about that. And we just, sometimes it's harder to figure out than some other times. And I think that, it's a shame to me, but it's a truth that I think women get run around in our medical system, our gynecological system sometimes. And I know it's not intentional at all by any doctor, but it happens because I hear it on a regular basis. And so I just really encourage women that kind of find themselves in a situation with unexplained pain to make, there are great doctors all over the country. And one of the best ways to get into the process is see a certified sex therapist or a sex therapist that's in the process of getting certified. And you can go to asect.org, and I'll tell you how to do that in a second. But if you go to asect.org, there's sex therapists listed from all over the world. We don't have them everywhere, but we certainly have pretty darn good coverage. And so if you find a sex therapist, because as I said a second ago, right, a good sex therapist, they're going to have a good team that they're going to refer to. So you find a good sex therapist will get you referred to a good medical doctor. And we need that good assessment, diagnosis before we can have a good treatment plan. Might include pelvic floor therapy, or might include physical therapy, pelvic floor work. But even that, I always go to my gynecologist first. My model is I refer to the gynecologist, if it's appropriate, refers to the pelvic floor specialist. And then that's how we work as a team, rather than me refer to a physical therapist first, because I want that diagnosis before I worry about the treatment piece. So if you want to find a sex therapist, and on the ASECT website, so it's AASECT, and ASECT stands for the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And on that website are all the certified sex therapists around the world by ASECT. And even if you can't find one in your area, there's a whole lot of people that are in the process of getting certified. And if you reach out to whoever's closest to you in your area, that sex therapist will know other sex therapists, even if they're too far away for you. I'm sure, most of us, all my friends and peers in this field are just awfully good people, and they really want to help. And I think if you reach out to somebody on that list, somebody will respond and help you. And if you can't find somebody, reach out to me and I'll help you. So those are some thoughts there with what to do with the two kinds of pain, explained pain and unexplained pain.
Hey, Neil, we have a question from Brenda from Vancouver. She's wondering if she could get the name of the doctor in Denver who has helped so many.
Yep. So the one I reference is Dr. John Slocum, and it's Slocumb, but John's not taking new patients. John's, I don't want to say he's older, but John's older. John's retired now, and he just doesn't take new patients. But if you back channel me, if you just email me, I can send you the other people here in Denver that are fabulous that you could talk to and refer to or get support from. So I'm happy to do that.
Great. And we also have a question from Jessica in Chicago. She writes, there seems to be mixed recommendations for how to masturbate for women who have never had an orgasm, using a vibrator versus her hand. You recommended starting with a vibrator, which I think makes a lot of sense. Could you please expand on this?
Yeah, I give women options. This is a conversation that I'm having. First of all, I'm kind of condensing this down into a few bullets, right? But when I'm teaching a woman to masturbate and have an orgasm, this is a 45-minute conversation that's taking place in my office. I'm asking lots of questions. And I do want them also to use their hands and be able to be comfortable with touching themselves and exploring themselves and using a mirror to look at themselves. A lot of women have never looked at their genitals. So this is a whole new experience for lots of women. Start to see what feels good, explore different kinds of touch. So they can do that with their hands. And I also have them do hand touch with lube. And then I'll have them do vibrator touch. So it's a mixture. If it's a woman who's never had an orgasm, one of the quickest and easiest ways to let her experience what that feels like is with a small vibrator, and just helping her get into the right headspace, an erotic space, and giving her permission. If a woman's never had an orgasm and she's never masturbated, which is also the case sometimes, there's a lot of permission that needs to go on, and just processing and gentleness, and trying to help her, just kind of figure this out. So I do both, but I definitely think that for a lot of women, vibrator is just a real kind of quick, easy way to get there and to get to orgasm and to experience pleasure, and to sometimes for some women it's giving them also permission to just keep riding the wave and not stopping too soon. So I hope that answers your question.
And we have another question from Daniel from Rochester, New York. What about erotophobia? I find resistance to recommending masturbation self-exploration when pulled back from the recommendation.
Yeah, so, I think we've all had clients where there's a resistance to looking at or reading erotica, looking at any kind of sexually explicit material, even though we have studies that say sexually explicit material is actually really helpful. But for some people, it's either it doesn't feel comfortable, or it doesn't feel moral, or it doesn't feel in line with their religion or their religious values. And so it's all okay. So I do a lot of permission asking, and I just do a lot of checking in, like, how would you feel about reading, how would you feel about watching a video that's sexually explicit that actually gives steps on how to have an orgasm? And I'd say 9 out of 10 women are like, yeah, no, I totally would like to do that. And then for the one that doesn't, okay, well then what else can we do? Let's start, we'll just explore. I think that, like Nancy Friday I mentioned earlier, and I like erotic and I like romance novels, so I keep it's okay to ratchet it back too. It's like, so for some women, and knowing your clients are important, right? So for some women, it's like, I might even just go straight to, how do you feel about romance novels, right? Do you have any that are kind of steamy that, you found to be arousing? And we start there. For other women, will step that up to like maybe Nancy Friday's book, My Secret Garden, which is loaded with, it's not a new book. It's 20 years old or something. but it's loaded with, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 different vignettes that are erotic fantasies for women. And I think it feels really safe for lots of women because there are, it's written by women, it's women's fantasies. It's really very different from, kind of from porn, so to speak. And for women, some women like porn, and if that's their thing, then that's cool, and then we can incorporate that too. But I actually don't usually do that when teaching them to masturbate. And quite frankly, most women that have never had an orgasm or don't know how to masturbate probably don't have a history of looking at porn, or not much of one. So I hope that answered your question, Dan. On penis problems, the way I think about it is, and I think though, obviously penis problems can be mental or they can be physical. So we have to figure that piece out. Sometimes problems in the little head start in the big head, anxiety, ADHD, all those kinds of things, whether it's delayed ejaculation or erectile difficulties. Delayed ejaculation, by the way, is when a man cannot ejaculate or it takes a really long time to ejaculate. All these things, and when any of these things are going on, it is such a powerful reason for men to feel like they have to withdraw from sex. And unfortunately, one of the cultural things that happens is sex becomes all about a man's penis. And when sex becomes all about a man's penis, it's a setup for a mess. So if it's about how hard he is, how long he's going to be hard, is he going to come at just the right time, too soon, too long, that's a lot of pressure to put on one little part of the body. And so kind of changing that energy sometimes for couples is really important. And all those things can actually lead to low libido, right? Why would I want to have sex if I think I'm going to, quote, fail? And we see this with aging too, right? As men start to get into 50s, 60s, 70s, and ED is increasing as a percent, then they're withdrawing from sex. And it's often the man who's pulling away from sex because he's afraid he's not going to be able to get hard and stay hard like he could when he was 20. Well, the body just doesn't work that way, so we have to get a little more creative. So my message really on this particular part of this is for men, don't let this be a reason to avoid sex. Because if any of these things are going on, whether it's ED or DE or rapid ejaculation, often called premature ejaculation or historically called that, all those things, every single one of those things can generally be improved, sometimes completely fixed, cured, solved, resolved, and at worst, better. And there's always workarounds too. So this is like a perfect time to see a sex therapist because you don't have to be stuck in your own head trying to figure this one out on your own. Did I go one slide too far now? So when I think about, kind of the problem that goes with some of the things we've talked about, and I think about what happens for couples with gaps in desire, you think about, well, what happens when there's a gap in desire? Well, one huge problem is the pain of rejection, right? There was a study a while ago, and they actually studied necrophilia, right? And necrophilia is having sex with dead bodies. And the number one reason for having sex with a dead body was, when they studied this small population, was the fear of rejection, right? Dead body doesn't say no. So to me, that's always been like, I remember reading that. I was like, wow, that just really struck me. It's just how painful it is when our partners tell us, no, we don't want you sexually. And even though that's not exactly what most partners say, that's kind of tends to be how it can feel. So the pain of rejection is huge. And there's a memory that goes with that too. And if there's enough rejection, then people stop initiating. And then that just sets off a whole vicious cycle. There's another problem that goes with all this too, is the pain of unpredictability. So when somebody has a libido that's at I really feel the most comfortable in my life and happy when I have sex, let's just say twice a week. Okay. Well, if they can't kind of know that that's probably going to happen most of the time, then they get into this pattern of, wow, I don't know what to expect. And then I get frustrated and I get resentful. So I think predictability for couples is a real important piece of the whole libido dance. My cat just jumped on my desk. He doesn't know we're broadcasting around the world. Hello, Chungwa. You scared me. But you can't stay. So then the third one is resentments build, right? This starts to happen when there's been enough of the other things that have gone on, and resentment builds, we're just distancing. The couples are getting farther and farther and farther apart. And then the other thing that happens, and happens all the time, which is sometimes the low libido partner gets shamed. I guess for those of you on radio, I've got an orange tabby cat that is now walking in front of my screen, and I'm kind of trapped here. So that's the tail. Now you see the tail. I'm going to do something if he doesn't leave quick. So the low libido partner and the high libido partner get shamed, right? Low libido partner gets shamed because he or she's broken. That's kind of the message that happens. Why don't you want sex? And in our culture, the low libido partner gets shamed. Then the same thing happens the high libido partner, because what do we call the high libido partner in our culture? He or she gets labeled as a sex addict or a nymphomaniac or whatever. And so then they get shamed. So it's kind of like culturally, if you don't want just the right amount of sex, whatever that is, not too much, not too little, you get labeled and, as either frigid or a nymphomaniac. And then we got shaming. So we're always, as a sex therapist, we're always trying to help people work through this whole shaming cycle and pattern.
Hi, Neil. Peter asks, do you negotiate frequency, and how do you address the shame?
Yeah. So I try to address the shame by normalizing different libidos. If you want sex once a day and that's how your body's set up and your mind, and that's what feels right for you and feels really good, that's okay. That's, it's just you. It's so individual. It is what it is. You like the amount of sex you like. And if you really feel satisfied having sex once a month, same thing. And we just normalize it, and it is what it is. So it's not better or worse, lower or higher. It's how does it impact your relationship? And how do we make that work? It's really about negotiating, and I really prefer to help couples collaborate on solutions. That's always the word that'll come up in my room, is let's collaborate on a solution to help you both get more of what you need. So, in the real world, most of us just don't get everything we want in life. It kind of sucks, but, so we can just get more of what we need and enough of what we need, then we're generally, pretty happy adults. So when I start thinking about, well, how do we close this gap? I'm thinking about, okay, let's focus in on the physical, hormonal, mental, all the stuff we talked about that we want to rule out. I want to make sure there's a good relationship connection. I want to expand the definition for sex so that, I'll never forget the couple that came in and they'd gone away with the homework assignment. They had decided they wanted to have sex that week. And they came back in, and she was the one with the lower libido, and he was so angry. And that was part of the problem, right? Because he was angry that they had this missed connection for so long. So he walks in, they sit down, and I said, okay, how did it go? And he said, well, once again, we didn't have sex this week. And it just makes me so mad, and I'm so tired of this. And another week without sex. And then on Sunday, while she was giving me a blowjob, that's his exact words, she was giving me a blowjob, then it just, I got frustrated and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, slow on down, wait a minute. Did I just hear giving you a blowjob and I didn't have sex in the same sentence, right? Because, so to me, expanding the definition of sex so that it's all sex, it's all good. It's not just a penis and a vagina. And if we do that, we'll have way more sex because we've exchanged the definition. And then helping couples plan for sex is huge. and the pushback we'll hear automatically is, well, I want sex to be spontaneous. Well, guys, you've been married for 10 years and you're busy. And I can tell you this to be an absolute fact. The couples that have planned sex plus spontaneous sex have more sex than people that just have spontaneous sex. We're all doggone busy. And if we don't carve out time and intention to have sex, often it gets forgotten. So planning for sex can actually be awesome. I have my couples take turns. You plan this week, you plan next week. Let's kind of figure out, like a time frame that it's going to happen so everybody can look forward to it, count on it, follow through on it, and then make it sexy. It gives you all week to think about it and look forward to it, anticipate it, and be creative with it. So then what we're doing is we're changing patterns too. So we plan for it for a while. Some people have planned for it forever, and that's okay too. And we get them set up. So now we've got a different behavior pattern that's starting to happen. And then that sets the stage for more spontaneous sex as well. Which then leads to improving the quality of sex. Because if you think about it, if we're trying to help couples close the gap, why would people want to have more sex if the sex isn't very good? Right? So we want to help couples if they have better sex, they'll have more sex. And better, of course, is a very subjective thing. So my dear friend and I, Lisa Thomas here in Denver, she's also a certified sex therapist, and some of you may know her. She's just a doll. And we created this model we call the wedding cake. And the wedding cake we use as a metaphor to talk to couples about sex. And so the way I kind of set it up is I'll have a whiteboard in my office. I always have two whiteboards. They're like probably 18 by 24, something like that. And I'll literally draw this 4-tier wedding cake, just like what you see here, except it's in my handwriting with a dry erase pen. And first thing I'll do is I'll explain, okie dokie. So here's kind of what I found in my practice. We have couples in the happy, healthy couple model, right? These are couples that have a good marriage or relationship and they have a good sex life. Well, they have kind of figured out how to have toe curling sex 10% of the time. Good satisfactory sex 2/3 of the time. And that can be, that means that maybe one or more people had an orgasm, means that they felt connecting, they're glad they did it. So there's your 65% or so. And then 25% of the time, something doesn't work. There's either pain for her or some kind of dysfunction for him in a heterosexual couple. So first off, just normalizing that for couples sometimes is like light bulb moments. I can think of 2 men that have stopped me at the door on the way out with the doorknob, their hand on the doorknob, and have literally turned around to me and said, that changed everything for me. Just hearing those numbers, that it doesn't always have to be toe curling, because culturally, right, everybody expects James Bond sex. It's always toe curling. It's just not true. Just not accurate. It's not real. So back to our cake model, on the left-hand side, I'll say, okay, so the couples in the happy, healthy couple model, it all starts with connection. If you're married or long-term relationship, you have a pretty good connection. Kind of going to struggle. Most couples struggle with having good sex. But now that we've done this work and your connection's really good, let's talk about the behavioral pieces. So I think about it like this, that this next tier, this cuddles and kisses tier, this is the biggest tier that holds up the rest of the cake, right? The connection piece holds up the sex piece. Cuddles and kisses holds up the next piece. And it's where couples in this happy, healthy couple model that I always reference, it's where they spend the most amount of time behaviorally. They are kissing, they're necking, they're making out. So then the next piece where they'll spend the next most amount of time is foreplay. Oral sex, manual sex, touching, stroking, pinching, slapping, whatever it is for you that gets you hot. Direct sexual foreplay. And then they'll spend the least amount of time on intercourse. And then I'll say to my couple, so tell me, what does your wedding cake look like now? And by now they're generally laughing, by the way, because we already know where we're going. And what they'll say is, if they're in my office and they're not having good sex, most of the time they're going to say, well, our cake's upside down. We just go straight to intercourse. Like, okay. So that's awesome. So now we've got data. So now tell me this. What do you want your wedding cake to look like? So on the left side, I'll kind of write upside down cake, or I'll draw a picture of an upside down cake. And then the right side is where we're going to do all the work. And on the right side, I'm going to say, okay, what do you want your wedding cake to look like? And that's where I'm going to help them deconstruct their sex life. And we'll talk about kissing and necking and making out. And how do they like that? And do they both like it? And do they like the way each other does it? And does it work? And does it feel good? And, some people love to make out. Some people don't. And so it's like helping them understand each other, helping them understand themselves, find out if, somebody's got bad breath. That's where that kind of comes up, and start to learn all the devil's in the details of these things. This is a 1 hour, this wedding cake intervention. So it's generally I devote almost a whole session to it. Then the foreplay piece, we'll go through the same thing. How do you feel about being touched directly on your genitals? How do you feel about oral sex? And we just start to flush all that out. Well, I'd like oral sex if he or she would just do a little different. And then we go straight to our Tristan Tremonto DVD on oral sex for fellatio and oral sex cunnilingus. I love those words. Where does that stuff come from? And so I'll let my clients borrow those. Those are great videos. And then we'll go to the intercourse piece, which most of us sex therapists call PV. How exciting, how erotic is that, huh? Penis, vagina, intercourse. And then we'll talk about positions, and we'll talk about pain, we'll talk about functioning, we'll talk about pleasure. We'll just kind of figure all that piece out. And so by now, they've spent an hour processing what they want their sex life to be like, and they've got a metaphor for it. And they'll walk back in the next week, and they'll say, Dr. Neil, we had cake. And then I smile and applaud and say, good for you guys, tell me about it. And they live happily ever after. So this is the wedding cake. Let's see. I think there's just that last slide I'll just leave there if you want it. I found that I have hypnotherapy works really well for a lot of these things. Libido, easier to have orgasms, women's sexual health, men's sexual health, all these things, sex addiction kind of stuff, out of control sexual behavior. But the problem was I couldn't get anybody to go to my hypnotherapist. You got to drive across town. It's $250. They don't want to tell their story to another person. So I just made my own doggone 20 recordings. I co-authored the script with a certified hypnotherapist. So just you can have your clients, or if you are a client, you can just go to this website, you buy it, have the client buy what they need for $39. They download it, they put it on their phone or their computer, listen to it once a night before they go to bed, listen to it the second week every other night, listen to it the third week every twice. And that solves an awful lot of problems. I use it as adjunct therapy for all the other work I do. And I've had situations where clients will come back and tell me this was the biggest thing that made a difference for them in the therapy process for different things. So that is almost all the time we have, unless somebody has a last minute quick question.
And I would just like to let everyone know who's on the phone, the hypnotherapy tapes can be found at audiocounseling.com.
Thank you. I forgot everybody's not seeing. Everybody's not seeing the cat on the screen.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Neil Cannon. We have a question if the PowerPoint is available.
Sure.
All right.
I don't know. I mean, I say sure on my end. You can distribute. You'd have to figure out how to do that, Douglas. I don't know how to do that.
Actually, I'm sending a link to it right now, and
okay.
It's in the chat window, and everyone who's online can click the link and get the PowerPoint. And for those on the phone, feel free to contact our office, and we'll send it out. All right. Dr. Neil Cannon, everyone. Thanks so much. This This recording will be available on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to youtube.com/Center for Healthy Sex, or you can just search Center for Healthy Sex on the YouTube search engine. We hear Lisa wants to say that cat was a fun touch.
Thanks, everybody. I really do appreciate everybody being on the call. Have a wonderful weekend.
Great, thanks. And just like to remind you, we have Erica Marchand next month, Common Issues in Interracial Relationships. That'll be on November 13th webinar. And for those clinicians who are in Los Angeles, we just booked today pelvic floor physical therapist, and she'll be talking about female sexual pain in November on the 20th for clinicians. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.